Hey crafty friends, it's Jen from Katahdin Crafts and I am back up on the ScrapbookPal YouTube channel today. For this month's project, I am showcasing some of the Catherine Pooler Designs new autumn release. I am loving everything that they came out with, and it was so hard to choose which I was going to start with first. And as you can see, I had to even do 2 cards because once I started playing, I didn't want to stop. The stamps I decided to work with today are the Give Thanks Sentiment set, and these are beautiful. The Be Thankful Always, Warm Harvest Blessing, Hello Autumn, and I love how the font is all different on each of the stamps. And then the Happy Thanksgiving with a grateful heart. There's all sorts of fun stuff on there. And then I'm also using painted leaves. And I love how these layer. You can see that you have the solid stamp on the bottom, and then it has the veins and the designs on the top to layer those together. And of course they come with a nice coordinating die set. And then this is called Light as a Feather background stamp. And I know it's called a feather, but it does give me that movement and that motion, and I think of rustling leaves on the fall trees. This is the stamp that I decided to start with today. I cut out a 5x7 piece of cardstock so I'd have plenty of space because I knew I wanted to cut it down. And then these nice cling stamps come on this hard piece of like plastic, which has 3 rings. So you could start a binder with those, but that's just an option. And so what I've decided to do is I'm going to layer my Distress Oxide inks. Now I'm coming up with a big autumn palette, so carved pumpkin, fossilized amber, barn door, peeled paint, rusty hinge, and gathered twigs. And I am going to layer all of these in no rhyme or reason. I'm just going to pat them on. I'm going to put them on top of each other. I'm going to stamp several different times. And I'm just going to get a whole little mixture of colors, that autumn palette. And my ink pads did get a little messy, but no big deal. You could just tap that off after and all will be good to go. So you can see I'm just tapping that down. I'm making sure that I get as much coverage as I can, but I'm not overly worried because I'm going to come back in several more times and do the same thing. So I will have plenty of coverage when I am done. When I'm stamping, I'm using my Misti tool, plus I'm also using my Maker Forte Smoosher tool, which just helps you get some nice even coverage. And then when I'm doing this background cling stamp, it's a thicker foam stamp, so you can remove the foam that comes in your Misti. So I just remove that, and I have the right dimension or the right depth for that background stamp. So as you can see, we're starting to build up all those beautiful layers. And it looks like autumn bliss to me. I love autumn colors. I've said it in several of my videos before. The autumn palette is probably my favorite time of year. Okay, so I built that up to what I believe was a great color coverage. And so I stopped there, and now I'm putting that foam piece back into my Misti, and I'm going to do the same thing with these autumn leaves. I'm putting in a piece of paper, a pretty large piece of cardstock, just to make sure I had plenty of space, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of space to cut them out after with my die cuts. And I'm going to go ahead and put these 4 leaves down on the bottom, or the bottom layer. And then in much of the same fashion, I'm going to start building up that color background again. And I'm just going to tap that on and just add a little red on top of that orange. And then we'll add a little bit of yellows. So all those beautiful autumn colors. And again, I'm not worried if I don't get like right in the middle of that leaf because I knew that I was going to do it several times. And use that smoosher tool. It just helps you get that even pressure. And when I use my Misti, I don't always use my magnet. I just make sure that I have it right in that groove of the corner and just make sure I reset it every time that I go and do another layer. And that works for me. And we're going to add a little bit of greens. And if you wanted a little bit more yellow or red, you can just add that as you go and just keep on adding until you get your desired effect. And we're all going to be different with what we like on this. And you can just see those colors like coming through on top of each other. I like that look. If you look on the ground, you're going to see leaves that look just like this. And here in northern Maine, I guess unfortunately, even though I do like autumn, but at the same time, I'm going to miss my beautiful summer weather. But we are definitely seeing the leaves change colors already. Some of them, not a whole lot, but some. All right, so now that I have that desired effect on those, I am going to go and add all those details back in with that second layer of stamps. So I'm just going to line those up to the best of my eye on each one of them. And then I will ink those stamps up with the peeled paint and then some of those browns, either the gathered twigs or the rusty hinge, which the gathered twigs will have a little bit more contrast at this point. So I'm going to use that on the bottom and then the peeled paint on the top layers or the top stamps. And if you get a little bit of over inking like I just did, I just use my finger and then wipe my finger on a cloth or a chamois. And then just press those down a couple of times to make sure you get nice, crisp, clear images. And I could have chosen to add a little bit of dimension to these with some embossing ink and some embossing powder, even in just clear, or a brown would have been nice too. There's so many possibilities with these leaves, and you could have, I could have easily done that, or even some sort of glitter would have been really pretty with that fall shimmer. Now here I decided that I wanted a couple of leaves that were definitely more yellowish. I wanted it to have a little bit more contrast with my background. So I'm just going to use the Fossilized Amber and then just a little bit of that carved pumpkin on the tips of the leaves. When I had those to my desired effect, I had to go ahead and add all those veins in. So with this second layer, I'm going to use the Gathered Twigs Oxide ink again. I do like the contrast that that gives against the yellow. And do you see how the nice little subtle orange on the tips of the leaves? I really like that little subtleness. Now I have that exactly how I want them, and it's time to go ahead and cut all of my leaves out with these coordinating dies. And I'm just going to bend those apart and then add those on with just a little bit of purple tape to hold it down, and I'm going to run all of those through my die cut machine. And once we get all of those cut out, it is time to start assembling our card. My card is an A2 size, so I cut out a card base of 5.5 by 8.5, and then I scored it at the 4.25, so then I get 5.5 by 4.25. My card frame is 5.25 by 4, and then my card panel is 5 inches by 3.75 inches, and that way it just layers perfectly, and you have about 1/8 of an inch around each layer. And I'm going to cut down my background. I'm just going to take all of that white off the edges, and then I'm just going to put the background into my trimmer and just cut off a diagonal section. I didn't measure it, I just went with what I thought would look nice. And that's how I'm going to layer on the card. And I'm just going to cut off any of that overhang that will happen. And so now for this other panel, I'm just going to go ahead and do the 3.75, and so that will fit on the card panel perfectly. And I thought it was just a little bit too wide or too long, so I went ahead and trimmed that down. And so that other piece, you could use that for another card too, as some sort of element on another card. So I'm going to glue the card panel down onto the card frame, and you can see that I kind of made a mistake here, and I will go back and fix it, but I probably should have waited to assemble my card. But I wanted to have the ability to see what those leaves would look like overhanging off the edges. But again, yeah, hindsight is always 20/20. And I'm going to add this bottom to this card, and at this point I didn't know that I was going to do 2 cards necessarily, but I had so much of that beautiful background panel available to use, so I just had to go for it. So I cut some of that card frame, the same red cardstock, which was just from my stash. I cut that in a little thin strip, and I just added that to coordinate it and tie it in with that frame, plus to give that little bit of space between the white and the background. And this time, I had already added the background, the panel onto the frame, so I had to attach this just a little bit differently. I overlapped it and put that right on to the background, and I'm just going to snip off those overhangs. And now I'm just going to use a little liquid glue and attach that to my card panel. And the ink was still a little bit wet. I could have waited a little bit to set that, or I could have sprayed it with some sort of sealer, but I just went ahead and just was very super careful with it. And I'm just going to snip off that other overhang, and now it's time to decide which sentiments I'm going to use for these cards. And there were so many to choose from, so I did play around with it a little bit, but I decided that Hello Autumn would look really nice, and then a Happy Thanksgiving. And I chose the larger sentiment to be in the card that has more white space. I thought that would balance the card a little bit better, and then the smaller sentiment for the space that was smaller. And I'm just going to stamp that out with my Lawn Fawn jet black ink twice to make sure that that's nice and crisp. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my Happy Thanksgiving. Going to line that up, make sure that that card is pushed up into that corner, line that up on my Misti, and then I'm going to stamp that twice as well. And I do like this ink because you do get a nice crisp image with it. And I decided just to do black as well. Again, I'm looking for all that contrast. So now I'm going to add my card panel to my card frame. And again, I should have waited, added my leaves, but you know, live and learn. I'm going to add this now to my card base. And I love using liquid glue because I have that little bit of wiggle room. I never get it on there perfectly, so then I can slide that around. And then I'm going to use my Smoosher tool as a weight to make sure that all those corners are going to be held down in place. I'm going to add that second card to the card base as well. And now it's time to decide how exactly I'm going to add these beautiful painted leaves onto my cards. So I did play with this a little bit to decide how the contrast and how I could showcase those the best. And this is the way that I found that they looked the best to me. I liked to try to balance that weight again and just add that leaf onto the top of that Happy Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is one of my most favorite days of the year. I love the whole meal and getting together with family, and it'll be here before we know it, won't it? So now I'm going to add the leaves to my Hello Fall. And again, the liquid glue gives you that wiggle. As you can see, I'm going to lift that up and slide it around until I get the placement that I want. And I'm still trying to be super careful not to get extra inky fingers, just because I didn't want to get them a little fingerprint where it doesn't belong, which, you know, happens often. So I wiped them off quite a bit. So here's where I made my mistake. So if I had waited to put my card frame or my card panel onto that frame, I could have snipped those leaves flush with my card panel. So I thought, well, this is okay. I'm going to be able to handle that, and it's not exactly the way I wanted it, but it'll be okay. And then I got out these pretty little gems from my stash that are autumn colors, and I worked with that, and the more that I looked at it, it just wasn't doing it for me. So I had to go and fix it. And I thought, you know what? That card base, it's just a piece of paper. So I can go ahead and cut another piece of paper and fix that the way that I felt more comfortable with. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. I did try to do it this way at first with my pen tool, but that wasn't going to work. But I did give it good effort. But I knew that I wasn't going to get it as crisp and clear as I wanted that to be. So at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to rip it apart. And that's what I did. I just removed that back panel, and I could still use half of that for a card base, so really not a big waste. And now I'm going to feel much better about using my scissors and just trimming that flush with the card frame. Would it look better with the card flush with the card panel? Perhaps, but this way was my compromise. You'll have to let me know in the comments what you thought, if I should have done it with the card panel, if I was okay with just leaving it on the card base. I don't know, but to me this was a happy compromise, and I just went ahead and added those gems, and then I made another card base and added that to the card, and I felt much better. So there we go. I have these two beautiful autumn cards that I can send out to family, and I love the color palette. I like the layering, how that worked out with the Oxide, and again, that motion that you get from that background stamp. I absolutely love it. And you can find all of the items that I used today at ScrapbookPal.com. They have a great store, and their shipping is super fast. You will not be disappointed. I appreciate you stopping by and crafting with me again today. Again, my name is Jen, and I am from Katahdin Crafts, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Happy crafting!